this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so in this episode we find out a bit more about the stand arrow and how it works, specifically in regards to somebody who already has a stand. So it starts off with Yoshihiro Kira panicking and flying off in Adam Heartfather to where Yoshikage Kira is hiding. And as it turns out, the reason he's panicking is because, thanks to Reimi Sugimoto, Rohan and Koichi now have a solid lead on who Yoshikage Kira might be. Pointing out that she noticed something was suspicious about Hayato Kawajiri, and how he seemed to have been filming his father. And realizing that Kosaku Kawajiri might be a possible suspect, they decide to get everybody together and decide to meet up at 8:30 in the morning so that they can actually go and possibly confront Yoshikage Kira if he does turn out to be Kosaku Kawajiri. So understandably concerned for his son's safety, Yoshihiro Kira flies off to the house to actually make sure that his son is safe and sound and to warn him. And as it turns out, he had every right to be worried. So as you guys may remember from my last review and how I explained how Hayato confronted Yoshikage Kira in the bath, and Kira kind of, tried to make it look like an accident. So naturally when Shinobu comes in and notices that A, Hayato is nowhere to be found, and B, that Kira is bleeding from his fingertips, she immediately goes to the cabinet where he's hiding and tries to clean him up and get a band-aid, only for Kira to point out to Shinobu that he's fine and that he can get it himself and that he just slammed his door in the fingers, which we know is a lie. And then proceeds to get a band-aid for himself while Shinobu leaves to go clean up all of the clothes that Hayato has left scattered all over the place. And also she points out a thought that she's had recently, that she feels like Kira might be immortal, or at least her husband. And with that she leaves, and the door then closes by itself behind Kira, only for it to be revealed that Yoshihiro Kira has indeed made it back to his son and is currently talking to him and trying to help him. Yeah, as it turns out, Kira was more than able to actually make it look like an accident. We've established that he placed a bomb in Hayato's hair to make it look like he hit his head. And while Yoshihiro remarks to his son that was a very smart move to actually deter the suspicion away from him, so that it didn't look like he got murdered. In hindsight, that just kind of wound up being bad timing because Rohan and the others are now coming to investigate, and since Hayato is now dead, that's kind of poses a problem. And Yoshikage is understandably very upset and on edge, and isn't entirely sure what to do or how to get out of this situation. To the point where he starts having his nervous tick, where his entire thing is fingernails, and this time is no exception. When he's nervous and feels like he's backed into a corner, he'll actually chew his fingernails to the point where they bleed. And Yoshihiro is quick to point out that Yoshikage has been doing that since he was a young child. And points out that it's clearly too dangerous for him to remain in Morio, and that he has to actually flee the town, which Yoshikage Kira openly refuses to do, and even grabs Yoshihiro's Adam Heartfather Polaroid in an effort to just kind of dissuade his father from actually taking him away from the town, because he does enjoy living in Morio, and he doesn't want to leave. And as it turns out, he may not have to, because as he's holding on to Adam Heartfather, the arrow that Yoshihiro Kira has been carrying around up to this point actually slips out of the Polaroid and into Yoshikage Kira's arm, and then retreats up his arm, and then jabs itself into the base of his neck. And Yoshihiro Kira is understandably very concerned for his son's safety, but something happens to Yoshikage in that time that he gets pierced by the arrow a second time. So it then cuts to the next morning, and Hayato is inexplicably alive. So we know that Yoshikage Kira has since murdered Hayato, so we know something is strange, without immediately being able to place our finger on it. But in case, Shinobu barges into his room, pointing out that he usually sleeps in, but when he's actually awake, she points out that she's a little surprised that he woke himself up, but then points out that breakfast is ready and that he needs to come downstairs. And then remarks that he never actually listens to her. And at which point Hayato begins mulling over everything that happened last night, about how he confronted Yoshikage Kira, about how he told Yoshikage Kira that he will have evidence of him to film and will be able to show the police or somebody else that important that there's actually a murderer living in his house. But only for things to suddenly change after they got out of the bath, with Yoshikage Kira suddenly not really seeming to care at all. Which I don't know, it's strange. But in any case, he goes downstairs to eat breakfast. He's still mulling over what he should do regarding his dad. When suddenly Yoshikage Kira walks into the house, and he looks a little bit different. The most obvious thing is that his hair is different. So his hair is actually now a white, kind of a mix of his original black color, but now it's streaked with white. And Hayato notices the strange new appearance of his quote unquote dad, and notes that something seems to have happened to him, and also notes that he seems to be unusually confident. And even Yoshihiro Kira is quick to point out to himself, because he's just hiding in the room watching all of this. And he's quick to note that that something suddenly changed after he showed up. As it turns out, he went to go. The situation played out exactly like last time, only for him to point out that only for Yoshikage, instead of panicking, to point out that his Killer Queen has actually gained a third ability and matured, and that he no longer has to worry about them finding Hayato or finding out about his identity anymore. Which strikes Yoshihiro Kira as odd, because he doesn't really know what this new ability actually is. But in case, as everybody's getting ready for the morning, the phone starts ringing and Shinobu yells at Hayato to answer it. He doesn't, because obviously he's lost in thought about and figuring out what to do about his dad. So she comes into the room to put down her tea set and pick it up herself, only for her to trip on the carpet and break it on the table. And then she proceeds to yell at Hayato because she dropped it because he wasn't listening to her, and she was trying to get his attention, which is partially true because Hayato was kind of spacing out, and if he had listened, she probably wouldn't have come into the room to go get him. So yeah, I mean, she wasn't watching where she was going, but it is kind of Hayato's fault because he wasn't paying attention. But in any case, as the two are yelling at each other, Kira dissuades them from actually arguing, pointing out that they should just act like a loving family and that they shouldn't be yelling at each other this morning because it's too early in the morning for that. At which point he tells Shinobu that he's going to work, gives her a kiss on the cheek, which freaks Hayato out for obvious reasons, and then walks out the door. And again, Hayato notes his unusual confidence, and after finishing up his breakfast, he pokes his head outside to see if Kira is still around, and doesn't initially see him, but he's hiding behind the door waiting for Hayato, and then decides that they're going to walk at least partially as they go before they separate a little bit. At which point Kira decides to deliver a monologue to Hayato on the way out. Not only revealing his true name and about how he did indeed murder two people, which Hayato strikes as odd and wonders if he's actually going to kill Hayato next. But when he does ask that, Kira merely laughs at him, pointing out that he no longer has any need to actually kill Hayato, pointing out that he's matured and that now his ability is invincible. And then proceeds to go to the train station and parts ways with Hayato. And after the little conversation with Yoshikage Kira, Hayato begins to think that he specifically referenced his ability, which means that there's other abilities similar to his, and wonders if there's any other people out there who are like Kira. But as he's trying to mull that over, he's suddenly approached by Rohan Kishibe, who was waiting in his car, and was waiting for Koichi and the others to show up that morning, because they were asked to meet around in a building with a Pepsi logo on top. So he's just kind of waiting outside that building, waiting for the rest of the group to show up. And he decides that this moment to actually confront Hayato and ask him a few questions regarding his father, well, father in air quotes, but he decides to ask him about Kasaku Kawajiri and what happened to him, only for Hayato to run, and Rohan is forced to use Heaven's Door on him to incapacitate him so he can learn the information he needs that way. And sure enough, Rohan then puts Hayato in the driver's seat of the car while he examines him with Heaven's Door. And while he doesn't find anything out of the ordinary at first, mainly he just learns a little bit more about Hayato's life. He suddenly notices something very strange called "read at your own risk," which Rohan immediately notes as odd because the way Heaven's Door works is that it turns people into a book, and then Rohan is able to read everything they've experienced, but he shouldn't be able to read what things that he hasn't experienced, and the fact that there's something fake inside of Hayato's book is a little bit odd to Rohan, and despite the warning, he decides to read, and sure enough, he, after a couple of example after example, he realizes that Hayato's Heaven's Door reading is actually predicting the future. Case in point, there's a man who walks by with his fly down and a couple of women laugh at him. Then it starts raining, and then lightning strikes above the Pepsi building. At which point Rohan starts to question whether or not Hayato is a stand user, but ultimately decides against it, pointing out that this is a little too weird, and that if he was indeed a stand, did indeed have a stand, he would have used it by now. But also points out that the way it works is very inconsistent with how stands are supposed to work. So he notes that it's a little bit suspicious. But then he proceeds to continue reading and discovers the truth regarding Kasaku Kawajiri and how he's actually Yoshikage Kira, which Rohan realizes is a gold mine because he realizes that the kid was actually the right way to go. And quickly realizes that he now knows Yoshikage Kira's real identity and knows that he's actually impersonating somebody now. And Rohan then proceeds to celebrate, but then continues to flip through the page, but then discovers that he was also killed by Killer Queen. At which point a miniature version of Killer Queen emerges from the book on Hayato's face, and Rohan hears Yoshikage Kira's voice in his head. Which then proceeds to explain how the ability works. So Rohan sees the miniature Killer Queen, tries to run, but the miniature Killer Queen, which announces that his ability is actually called Bites the Dust, declares that it's already too late and that he's already been marked by Bites the Dust. And then proceeds to be fatally wounded by the stand as several explosions burst from his body, and he's left with several major wounds. At which point Rohan collapses on the stairs nearby, and he realizes that he finally has all the information he needs to actually warn everybody about who Yoshikage Kira really is. But realizes that he's not going to be able to tell anybody, and realizing that that it's almost 8:30 and that he's supposed to meet everybody, and sure enough, Jotaro and Koichi show up right on time. Rohan tries to run toward Koichi and Jotaro and try to get their name, but is too wounded to actually move. At which point Killer Queen announces the true purpose of Bites the Dust, and then proceeds to activate the explosive. At which point Rohan Kishibe explodes as Hayato wakes up and witnesses the whole thing, and then time loops. So yeah, Hayato initially believes it's a dream. He wakes up in his bed. It's that more like nothing happened. He goes back through his morning routine again, but notices that everything is exactly the same as it was. So he quickly realizes that time is looping, and that he's actually trapped in a time loop. And realizes that's likely the ability that Yoshikage Kira was referring to. That so long as anybody knows so long as anybody tries to approach him, he won't be able to actually win. So, at which point Shinobu again, the phone rings, and Shinobu again goes to yell at Hayato for not listening to her and picking up the phone. But this time, instead of her dropping the tea set, Hayato actually catches it as it's in midair and places it safely on the table. And Shinobu even remarks that that's almost as if he knew it was coming. At which point, and then she goes to talk on the phone. And while she's on the phone, Yoshikage Kira then proceeds to confront Hayato, and remarks that he must have killed somebody and was looped back because that's the way his ability works. At which point he then proceeds to explain. He then proceeds to ask who Hayato blew up, and Hayato merely remarks that he didn't tell anybody. Which Kira then deduces must mean is Rohan, since he has a way of finding out information without having to talk to somebody. So he concludes it must be him. At which point he then proceeds to explain how Bites of Dust actually works, or at least to a further extent. As it turns out, anybody who tries to find out Yoshikage's identity, either by talking to Hayato, trying to read his memories like it did with Heaven's Door, or any other sort of scenario, they will be blown up and Hayato will be sent back an hour. And as it turns out, that's how Hayato's actually alive. Yoshikage Kira actually rewound him to an hour before he was actually confronted in the shower. So because of that, Hayato was never killed by Killer Queen and is therefore now alive in this timeline. So yeah, effectively he points out that he used Killer Queen Bites of Dust to basically turn Hayato into a bomb, and that now Hayato is going to kill a whole bunch of people, whether he wants to or not, so long as he knows that his dad is Yoshikage Kira. So yeah, that's where the episode ends, and it's a two-parter, but it's a hell of a two-parter, because not only does it explain how the stand arrow works to a further extent, but it also explains that Hayato is kind of screwed. So yeah, this episode sets up that if somebody is struck with the bow and arrow again, if they already have a stand, they gain new abilities. And case in point, Yoshikage Kira wanted an ability that would protect his identity and protect people from actually finding out, and he gained an ability that enabled him to rewind time by turning somebody else into a bomb. So that every time they try to ask him something, the person just blows up and then time rewinds to an hour before. So effectively, Hayato is trapped in a time loop with no way to actually stop it. So that begs the question of how is he going to actually tell everybody that his dad is Yoshikage Kira if he can't actually tell them? That's going to be an interesting thing, because that's how the new ability works. If Bites of Dust hears somebody asking about Yoshikage Kira, it'll blow them up and then send Hayato back an hour. So Hayato has to constantly find ways to actually move through time without actually asking anybody, and actually finding a way to tell somebody about what's happening. And also, I would like to point out, 3 for 3 of Yoshikage Kira's abilities are all named after Queen songs. So methinks that he's a Freddie Mercury fan. Just saying. But in any case, that's my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Also, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below to keep up to date with what's going on with the channel. I post updates over there. I also post whatever I find over there. I try to like and comment and stuff like that that I think is funny. So check that out if you want to laugh at something. If you have the same sense of humor I do. And also be sure to check out my Patreon. It's only a couple bucks a month. It helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks. I'm always saying thanks. Not least of which is that if you do actually pledge to me on Patreon, then you will actually be listed on my website along with social information if you have the applicable tiers, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I also post written reviews over there, which I need to do more of, but I've been posting written reviews over there for a while now. So if you guys do want to help support me on Patreon, then you'll be able to see your name on my website, which is also an incentive to go over there and check out some of my written reviews. And also, I've been streaming on Twitch since the last Sunday. I posted the archive up here, but on YouTube, but admittedly I kind of screwed it up a little bit. After finding out what I did wrong, but I fixed it for next time. We can learn from that mistake. But yeah, I played only cans. Unfortunately, there's no mic audio, but it is up here. You can still learn the story of the game. You can still learn what it is. Even if you don't have my commentary and me talking to it, there's also just scenes of me out of context and me just dancing along with the music, which I think will be funny. But Yeah, go check out my Twitch. I've been streaming over there since this past Sunday. I'm going to be streaming Miitopia there this coming Sunday. So yeah, if you want to see more streams from me, then be sure to check that out. But regardless of whether or not you do any or all those things, thank you guys so much for watching. And so next time I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!